Hello, my name is Molly Sharp, and I'm the artist in residence for the American Viola Society for January and February. So grab a cup of coffee, a mug of tea, because today I want to chat about something that is not really being talked about in our world of classical music, and that is the role that trauma may play in performance anxiety. I don't think this topic is being avoided, I just think people are simply not aware of this issue. Several years ago, I had a realization that there was possibly a link between trauma and performance anxiety. I started to explore the topic of trauma and started talking to professional musicians about their own experiences. So much has been written about working on one's performance anxiety, and the classical music world has borrowed and adapted some great concepts from the world of sports psychology. You're probably familiar with the work of Don Green. However, I have found that you can do all of the adversity training you want, design a rigorous practice schedule, but it doesn't address what happens when you get triggered, and it doesn't address the root cause of your trauma response. A trauma response is different than nerves. People who are undergoing a trauma response while playing will say things like, suddenly it's like a switch flipped, or I could barely play, and I was totally out of my body. Or a seasoned performer may say, I've been playing and performing too long to still have these issues. What's going on? Fortunately, the topic of trauma is becoming more and more mainstream, and you may have heard terms like trauma informed teaching or trauma informed yoga. The topic of trauma is becoming more widespread in our culture, and more people are stepping up to talk about their trauma experiences and their journey towards healing. But let's start with the question, what is trauma? So, a simple version, which I've borrowed from Jesse Baldwin, who's a voice teacher, says trauma generally is when someone is experiencing too much, too fast, or when someone's needs cannot be met. And when you think of trauma, you may think of the big things, which I'll call capital T trauma, like being mugged, being assaulted, war, life threatening injuries, a car accident, physical abuse. But trauma is much wider than that. It can be an event, but it can also be the accumulation of smaller traumas over time. Examples of this could be verbal or emotional abuse, neglect, being bullied, the effects of racism, poverty, discrimination, historic and intergenerational trauma, think slavery and the Holocaust, divorce, the breaking up of a family, or the death of a parent at a young age. So there are two parts to trauma. It's both what happened to the person and the reaction to it. Our body tries to protect us from overwhelming events, and our brain literally gets rewired so we can cope. Also, our nervous system, which is basically only concerned with am I safe or not safe in this moment, goes into overdrive. And if you have unresolved past trauma, it might send a code red message to the brain that is disproportionate to the event. Dissociation is also at the root of trauma, and parts of our brain go offline. For example, the areas that help us with executive function go offline, and the older parts of our brain that only focus on survival kick in. We have trouble sequencing, speaking, and we can lose awareness of the position and movement of our body. So, not great things to happen while we're trying to play and perform. Negative things happen to everyone, but if you have no way to process the event, these events can get stuck in your body and become trauma. Now, as children, we often don't have the emotional support or tools to process or metabolize upsetting things, so it stays with us. We often create coping mechanisms in order to survive trauma, and left unexamined, these coping mechanisms like freezing, escaping into our minds or imaginations, or leaving our bodies will affect how we react to stress in our adult life. So, how does this all relate to performance anxiety? Well, being on stage and in the spotlight, especially auditions, can trigger all kinds of reactions based on past trauma. The fear of being seen, feelings of being trapped or powerless, the fear of being heard, feelings of not being good enough and low self-worth, and not feeling safe, just to name a few. I also want to mention that the culture of classical music, which focuses on perfectionism, constant comparison to our peers, being shamed for making mistakes, or being exposed to teachers or conductors who are verbally abusive, can be the cause of trauma as well. Now, perfectionism is born out of trauma, but that is a big topic for another day. I do want to point out that not everyone who has trauma will have crippling performance anxiety. In fact, for many musicians, playing an instrument and performing, it was our therapy and salvation. Orchestra might have been a place of belonging, and the orchestra or band room was where we found our tribe. I want to start this conversation in order to create a more trauma informed culture in our field so that musicians can reach their potential, feel more comfortable putting themselves out there, and feel safe bringing their whole selves to their playing and their job. I also want to encourage teachers to do their own healing work so that we don't offload our own issues and trauma onto our students. We can change the culture one person at a time, but it calls upon us to be conscious cycle breakers. One of the main tenets of recovery and healing is we don't heal in isolation, so having support on this healing journey is crucial. But that's the good news. We can heal, and in healing our trauma, we can change our relationship to performing. Healing past trauma in order to feel safe on the stage is definitely worth the work, and it will allow you to remain present and able to enter into the process of making music wholeheartedly, which is just about the best, most rewarding experience you can have. Let's keep this conversation going, so please share this video with others who might be interested in this topic, and thank you for watching. For more information about this topic, go to vlatuti.com, select About in the navigation bar, and then Trauma and Performance Anxiety, and there you will find a blog where I write about this topic. If you have questions or thoughts, feel free to email me at molly@vlatuti.com.